Hello, everyone. We are like so excited to be here today to be able to share a little bit of the story behind our new company, Brain Love Health. And we're just super excited. This is our first live ever. So I'm going to tell you, I'm a little nervous, but I know he's not nervous at all. And so thank you for joining us. Thank you for taking a little bit of time in your day to be here. Um, my name is Anna, and this is Patrick. And to just tell you a little bit about myself, just a little four facts. I am a mom, and I am a wife, and I'm also a functional nutrition counselor and a health coach. And you're going to hear a little bit more about this as we go on in our story today.
This is one of the first parts of a series we plan to introduce to everybody so you get a more in-depth understanding of what this company is all about. We've been on social media now for many months, just kind of introducing some of our concepts. And I know one of the things that occurs all the time is people say, oh my God, what do we need? We need another supplement. We need another nutritional supplement. There's so many on the market. Or we hear things like, what about Prevagen and those kinds of products that essentially have been on the market for many years? Well, that's not at all what Brain Love is all about. Brain Love is a completely different approach to trying to find ways in which we might be able to support cognitive decline, primarily in women. We do have lots of ideas that will also apply to men. I'm going to talk a lot about our science and relative to how some of our early science actually found that it works very effectively in men. But our product primarily is geared to women at this point, and we'll tell you more about the ingredients, why each ingredient is involved, why we've put it in our formulations, how it works synergistically with your body. And I also want to say that it's very important that as we explain many of the things that we're about to talk about, it's in one sense we're trying to reimagine ways in which we treat healthcare. I've been in the pharmaceutical business for 40 years. I understand the typical traditional pharmaceutical approach to treating disease, and this is different. We're trying to reimagine that. We believe very strongly, and I hate to always use the cliche that Hippocrates is quoted, which is basically
Let food
let food be
be
your
medicine.
medicine. But essentially, I think we may be coming full circle in our understanding of how we treat disease. And I'm not one that believes that magic pills exist for everything that can pop up. Although we'd love like to think there's a magic pill for every disease that can come up. And that's been one of the primary issues that's been facing the dementia world for many, many years, that everybody's had this hope that there's going to be some magic pill that's going to make your dementia go away, and everybody's going to walk away happy and feel fulfilled because we were able to accomplish that goal. I have news for everybody. And again, I've been in this business a long time. I understand it. And I'm very committed to the people around the world that have this problem because I've experienced it in my own family. I've experienced it in friends. And it's something that's very near and dear to my heart. So I'd like to say also we're broadcasting here from sunny Florida. Today is a I hate
Rainy day.
it's a rainy day, but it's still
Still
85
beautiful.
degrees and beautiful.
Yes.
So
Yes. So how about the reason why we wanted to do this live is to tell you a little bit of how passionate we are about creating this company, but we wanted to let you know too the to take you deep back into the years, and that comes with your story. So
as,
how would you tell people where it all
well, as Anna
began?
said, she's a mother, a wife, um, uh, involved in functional nutritional counseling, health counseling, and that's actually how I got to know her was through my own quest in trying to improve my own health, my own life, my own perspective on how to deal with issues that you deal with on a daily basis. But my story goes back quite a few years. I hate to say it, but I've been here a long time. I will be turning 70 next year. And even though I know I don't look like I'm 70, I will in fact be turning 70 next year. And essentially, where this Brain Love Health story starts goes back into probably the late 1990s and into the early 2000s. For many of you that do know me that may be tuning in, many of you know my career, but essentially, I've been involved in ways in which we can change the trajectory of different things that we have to deal with in healthcare. My first enterprise, which had been extremely successful, was really one of the first companies that got involved in trying to bring patients out of the hospital as technology changed and we were able to use technology to now treat people at home. We were able to create ways in which we could do infusion therapy treatments in the home setting. Now, back in the late 80s or mid 80s, late 70s, that was unheard of. People felt nothing like that could be done. It had to be done in a hospital. And we changed the perception of how that could be done with technology and very high touch work with the patients that we used to work with. And we initiated that concept initially with pediatric patients. Now, what would be better than to be able to get one of your children out of the hospital quicker, in a better environment where mom and dad can be around them all the time, give them a better quality of life, but at the same time, lower the cost of being in the hospital. Well, I was involved in one of the first companies involved in that. As a matter of fact, that's a multi $20 billion business these days. But anyway, I took that success to look for kind of what my next contribution would be. Keeping in mind that my approach to all these things has always been ways to make lives better for people that needed help. That's always been my driving force. Um, and again, that's the thing that drives me relative to business as well as Brain Love Health. So, with that experience, I started to look at ways in which we might treat chronic disease and look for ways in which we might be facing some of the issues we faced back in the 1990s and early 2000s, which many of you are very much aware that chronic disease, heart disease, cancer, dementia, things like that are the leading causes of death in the elderly population. So, during that time, I had the opportunity to come across a physician who had some anecdotal information that he was treating patients that had Alzheimer's disease, but he was treating them with a drug that was treating something different. And the drug that he was treating them with was to treat their prostate cancer. And that drug was designed to eliminate the testosterone in their body. And essentially, when you have prostate cancer, the no is testosterone. That's one of the things they look for when you have prostate cancer. Anyway, to make a long story short, the observation was that these patients were getting this medicine, and these patients were seemed to be um, leveling off in their decline in dementia. Well, that made no sense to any of us. And after we heard this story 2 or 3 times, we started to ask ourselves some questions. Why is this? What's going on here? Well, what we began to understand, and this is where I don't want to get totally technical and scientific on everybody, but what we began to understand is that this drug was affecting the way the hypothalamus and the pituitary and the ovaries, or not the ovaries in the sense of men, but the gonads were working. And the way it suppressed the production of testosterone was that it eliminated the ability of the testicles to create testosterone. So it was interrupting what is called the HPG axis, the hypothalamic pituitary gonadal axis. So, with that information, we began to do some research. And I think this story is relevant because it's very important to the whole story of dementia and how it works.
Mhm.
Am I boring you yet? So, a set.
Well, What I was gonna say is, I just think it's for me, you have inspired me to see how you were doing life with your family, having babies, um, playing golf, cooking, and then all of a sudden you wanted a little more. And that little more meant not more for you, but more for people out there suffering from Alzheimer's disease. And you went on and took on the challenge to find a solution for this terrible disease.
That's exactly right. I mean, I don't want to say that I was bored, but I was at a point in my life where I felt like I had things that needed to be contributed, and it was important to me to do that. And as I started to look around and see the problems that were people were facing, I wasn't completely satisfied that the typical pharmaceutical and or hospital in hospitalization approach was the right approach. So that's kind of what inspired me to look for certain things. That, as Anna said, I have 6 children. Um, they keep me busy, and all the things associated with trying to raise children and the ins and outs of everybody that has children knows what that's like. It's a huge commitment, but at the same time, I feel personally that I had a purpose to do something that was going to affect larger populations and do something that was going to have an impact on society. So getting back to the issue of where we went with the anecdotal knowledge of these particular men who seem to um, stop declining in dementia, which never happens in Alzheimer's disease and dementia. It's a constant downward trend. So we began to do some research to figure out what the issues were associated with Alzheimer's disease. Now, many of you may or may not know, and I don't want to get too deep into the weeds here with the science, but Alzheimer's is made up of a number of factors. One of the factors it includes is the fact that the neurons or the cells are dividing, and neurons aren't typically designed, or they're not really designed to divide. Neurons are part of your body that, when your body grows and develops when you're young, become terminally differentiated. That is, you can think of the neurons as being a cell with all these different electrical conductions that occur, and think of all the havoc that would occur if neurons would be dividing all the time. Those electrical circuits would completely get disjointed. Now, you can increase the amount of electrical circuits that a neuron has, but typically they're not designed to divide, and consequently, when they do divide, they typically go through a process that's called apoptosis, which means they die. Now, what happens when neurons die? They leave debris, they leave clutter. And so that's one of the hallmark parts of the disease. Essentially, the neurons are going into what we call an aberrant cell division process. In the process of that occurring, typically, as you all know, when you have disease process going on, it causes inflammation. Inflammation is part and parcel of a lot of different diseases, whether it be cancer, whether it be arthritis, whether it be any number of things. We all know about inflammation. Another hallmark of the disease is oxidative stress. And oxidative stress is related to things like free radicals and in ways in which the cells just aren't functioning properly and under undue stress. Another part of the disease is what they call tau tangles, which are basically little things that occur when cells become disruptive. They form these little clumps in the brain, and they block transmissions. Um,
And I was going to say, it would be also nice for people to know why we're focusing so much on women.
yeah, and I will get to that.
Hmm.
But I think before I can get to that, I should probably just try to get to the point where how the heck did we get into the spot where we thought women were the target, or the group that needed our help the most. So those were the hallmark efforts related to the disease. And so we began to study each part of that. And I became very close with a number of neuroscientists around the country. Many of them are very, very famous scientists today relative to neuroscientific departments at the University of Texas, at Case Western Reserve. There's individuals that are now at the University of Florida, at Kent State University, at some of the clinics in the Boston area, and Brigham and Women's, associated with MIT, and so on. We began to deal with a number of different neuroscientists and asked a number of questions. Well, one of the questions we asked was, why are cells trying to divide and why are neurons dying? Because that seemed to be the triggering point for what was the predominant theory of Alzheimer's disease during those days, which was that beta amyloid plaques were the causative factor. And all the scientific community up until that point was focusing their attention on beta amyloid plaques and ways in which they could get rid of those plaques. The theory was when they would autopsy Alzheimer's brains, they would see these beta amyloid plaques, and therefore that was the causative factor of the disease. When in fact, we found, and even now today, it's becoming almost mainstream to think that it's not beta amyloid plaques that are causing the problem. Beta amyloid plaques are a response to another event that's occurring downstream. It's basically like thinking when you cut yourself and then you form a scab, you're saying the scab's the problem when in fact it was the cut that caused all the activity to begin with. So that's kind of the concept we're trying to promote here. So at the time, myself and a number of other people used to say that we didn't believe it was beta amyloid plaques. And quite frankly, that was heresy in those days. And even up until recently, beta amyloid plaques and all the pharmaceutical research that's been going on was designed to focus on that particular target. And I used to say, I hate to say it, I think I was right, and I'm still right, that it's not the beta amyloid plaques, it's another event, which is basically aberrant cell cycling or cell division, which has caused neurons to die. Now, if neurons are starting to die, why is that? We ask ourselves those questions. What's causing neurons to die? And this is what gets us to the women and the men that Anna would like me to get to. Essentially, what's occurring is as we start to approach andropause in men and menopause in women, the HPG axis that I discussed earlier becomes dysregulated. I don't have to go into an in-depth tutorial to women about what starts to happen as they start to hit perimenopause. And I don't have to go into all the discussions about the issues that they face, whether it be weight gain, hot flashes, changes in mood, hair, skin, all the issues that women start to experience during those years. So what's occurring essentially, and and again, my theory is this, that things that are good for us as we're going through growth and development as children, teenage years, and through our reproductive years becomes dysregulated at the point in which you hit menopause. Now, menopause and andropause, which is basically male menopause, are two different trajectories. We all know that in women, menopause occurs fairly abruptly over probably 10 years. It starts, and within 10 years, the process is finished. In men, it's much slower. And what you notice in men is that they do get Alzheimer's disease, but they only get it as like 1/3 the amount of times women get it. Women have 2 times more Alzheimer's disease than men. And I believe it's related to the fact that their menopause is more abrupt. So we began to study that whole process. What is it about women that's different than men? And what we were able to determine is that their menopause is a significant factor relative to the the issues of cognitive decline. Now, how does that occur? Because that's the question science has been looking at for many, many years. You still with me?
Yes.
Okay.
Awesome.
So I want to talk a little bit about what's been studied and what hasn't been studied. For years and years and years, we knew estrogen was an issue in women, and we knew that losing testosterone in men was an issue. And quite often, no one really attributed that to the issues related to, say, aging, when in fact, many of those things are actually very naturally aging. Think about the way the hormones work in your body throughout your life. And when you're in a child, as a child, you grow and develop, and then at some point you reach puberty, and your estrogen and your testosterone kick in. We all know what happens. You grow like a weed. You now become adults and become reproductively viable. And essentially, what my belief is at the point where you're no longer reproductively viable, it's a very natural process for nature to start doing the things that nature does, because that's the way nature works. It's very natural, and it's very natural biological processes. And one of the ways these issues start to develop is as your estrogen starts to decrease, there's another hormone that's part of, remember what I talked about, the HPG axis. There's another hormone that starts to go up. And that hormone is stimulated by the brain, essentially. The hypothalamus and the pituitary are telling the body, I want estrogen. Why do I want estrogen? I want estrogen because I want to maintain reproduction. But as the body starts to lose its ability to lose reproduction, the hypothalamus and the pituitary produce more of this other hormone. And the name of that hormone is called luteinizing hormone, LH for short. And as estrogen starts to decrease, LH increases. And when the body's no longer able to produce estrogen, or the ovaries, or in the case of men, the testicles are no longer to produce the kind of testosterone that the body would like to see, the LH keeps saying, no, no, I really want this stuff. I want it because I want to preserve the ability of the organism to continue to reproduce. So the estrogen keeps going down to the point where at some point it can't produce any of the estrogen, and the luteinizing hormone keeps going up, 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 up. So that was the theory we came up with back in the early 2000s, and we began to study what effect does luteinizing hormone have on cells of the neuron.
Excellent.
You with us?
Yeah.
Okay. I know this
I know
is,
it's a little
I hate to get
very
so deep,
scientific.
and I'm trying to keep it simple,
No, but I think it's good
and
for us to know.
I think our audience and the people that are interested in the topic, if you really want to know how does brain love get to the ingredients that we get to downstream, which we'll get to someday, or maybe later, it's important to understand that there's really solid scientific theory behind what we did. But it's not just scientific theory. We've actually tested these theories in humans, and I'll get into that in a little bit. So here we are at the story where luteinizing hormone may be the problem that's causing the cells in the neurons to divide aberrantly. Now, why do they do that? Well, one of the things we know is luteinizing hormone's very active throughout our life, and it's actually part of the growth and development process. When you're in utero growing as a fetus, there's a high level of luteinizing hormone surging through the mother's body, and that's helping the cells to grow and develop. And what does that mean? That means luteinizing hormone is what we call a very mitogenic hormone. Mitogenic means stimulates cell division. So while you're growing and developing in utero, you're growing, developing, your cells are dividing like crazy. Obviously, you come from this big to a little beautiful little baby. And at that point, you're born. And for the next 2 years, up until about age 2, you have high levels of luteinizing hormone surging through your body. At that point, your body, the luteinizing hormone starts to decline slightly. Not doesn't go away, but starts to decline. And then at the point you hit puberty, luteinizing hormone kicks in again and starts that surge in growth and development in your body. Now, I think it's obvious to everybody that we can see the trajectory of how from a fetus to a 2-year old, to a teenager the process that's occurring. Obviously, something stimulating your cells to grow and divide. And essentially, what that's doing, it's preparing you for reproductive years. And so now you're a teenager, your reproduction starts. And in women, as you all know, your luteinizing hormone begins to cycle every month. Every month it goes up, every month it goes down. And there's a very complex interaction in your endocrine system between the estrogen and the luteinizing hormone. So this process goes on for the next 30 to 40 years. And now you're around 45, maybe 50. And what we start to see is your estrogen starts to decline. The luteinizing hormone keeps asking the ovaries to produce estrogen, again, to preserve the reproductive process, but the estrogen can't be produced by the ovaries because they're starting to decline. They're getting older and they're just not working the way they did when you were 20. So now at this point, your body keeps more creating luteinizing hormone. Now remember, I tied the luteinizing hormone to the process of growth and development when you were younger. The problem you have when you get to the point where your ovaries are no longer producing estrogen, the body still wants to produce the estrogen. So the very same hormone that was very supportive and helpful for you as a child, as a teenager, as a reproductive female, is now starting to cause things in your body to go wrong. Now, what does that mean? The luteinizing hormone keeps going up, and the body can't give it what it wants relative to the types of interactions it wants. So it starts to cause what I call aberrant cell division in areas you don't want that to occur. So far, so good?
Mm-hmm. And I want to let anyone know that if you guys want to ask any questions, we're open to answering your questions.
So here we are at the point where luteinizing hormone's going up, estrogen is going down, and what do we start to see happen? A lot of things start happening. What happened? Weight gain starts to come around. It's difficult to maintain your weight. You've got to do all kinds of things to keep your body in shape that you might not have done in your 20s and 30s. You start to process, and every woman knows about this also, osteoporosis starts to become a problem. And in my research over the years, we were also able to attribute osteoporotic issues to a high level of luteinizing hormone. And we actually did research on that. And then, more importantly, in the purpose of this whole discussion, is we believe it starts to stimulate a mitogenic response in the neurons. And that mitogenic response is the triggering point in which we see neurons starting to divide when in fact they're not supposed to. Neurons don't typically have the ability to divide. And when they get to the point where they're stimulated to divide and they start to divide, they die. They go through a process called apoptosis. And now we have dead debris up in the brain. And I believe that's the primary causative factor that's leading to dementia and cognitive decline. Now, this doesn't happen overnight. It's a slow process. And what we've been able to determine is that typically, and here's some interesting things I think women would like to hear about. Typically, dementia and cognitive decline start to occur approximately 20 to 25 years after menopause. Mm-hmm. Now, why is that? Because it's a slow process. It doesn't happen overnight. It's not a switch, but it's a slow process. But you don't start to notice the dementia and the cognitive decline for about 20 to 25 years, in some cases 30 years, because that's how long it takes to reach the point where it's now affecting you symptomatically. And from that point on, it declines worse and worse and worse over the years. Many of you know how that process works. The same thing occurs in osteoporosis and other issues that women face. So once these cell divisions start to occur and the brains start to die, that then triggers the other responses that we have to deal with relative to dementia, such as inflammation. Remember, disease process causes inflammation. Oxidative stress basically is involved in the process. And it's kind of a spiral that needs to be addressed. Now, up until these days, the approach has been, because the cells are dying and because there's plaques and tangles inside the brain, that's the causative factor. I don't believe, I know it's not the causative factor. It's a result of things that have occurred downstream and are creating the debris in your brain. Now, the other thing that I think that starts to occur is, once that debris accumulates, it can't it can't cross the blood brain barrier the way things used to go back and forth through the blood brain barrier. So the beta amyloid can come up to the brain, but once it starts collecting the debris associated with the dead tissue, the dead neurons, or the aberrant tau tangles, it now can't get out of the brain, and essentially your brain becomes more clogged, more clogged. And essentially, as we all know, the whole process of dementia is the brain is shrinking because the cells are dying and you're losing your ability to have your cognitive function. Now, this may be one of the most depressing topics you could talk about for everybody, because you're thinking, what the heck do we do about that?
Yes.
And essentially, that's what our approach is. We believe we have the answers that can help stop that process. I don't want to say, and I won't even say, we do anything that will prevent or
Or
stop
cure.
or cure the process of cognitive decline, Alzheimer's disease, or dementia. What I'm suggesting is, if you proactively start addressing the issues early enough, like at menopause, you can balance the process of the luteinizing hormone and the estrogens that I talked about, and I believe at some point slow significantly the problems that'll be associated with cognitive decline and other women issues. But our focus here is primarily on brain. So
Do
let me
you
take a
wanna?
pause here and
Yeah.
take a breath and
Yes. Drink
let you
some
jump
water.
in.
No, I was gonna ask you, because I think there's a really important piece of your story after you were doing the research.
Yeah, so this is the part of the story I don't like.
You don't like,
I
but
don't
it's.
like, but
I
it is
think it's
it's part of the
important.
story.
It is important for me. It is important.
Um, when we started this process, I think I had mentioned I had been very successful earlier in my career. I mean, by successful, I mean we had a very, very vibrant company. I started a company in Boston that essentially was backed by venture capitalists, some of the best in the industry. And during that period, I became a guest lecturer at Harvard Business School. I was a very successful entrepreneur. Made a significant amount of money with a public company. You could look it up. It was called New England Critical Care America. It's really one of the predecessor companies that now is owned by CVS Pharmacy and is called Quorum Healthcare. It's the largest infusion therapy company in the United States of America. So after that experience, and I got involved in the Alzheimer's Project, a significant amount of my net worth went into this project. Now, we had a lot of other investors, but a lot of the money was mine and my family's money. When I say my family, I mean my wife and my children, and consequently, that part of the story is not the best part. However, during that period, we probably invested $85 million in this process of research and drug development. And I'll come back to the drug development part in a minute. But after 12 years of work and $85 million in my entire net worth, when I say my entire net worth, I put in every penny I had. Why did I do that? And quite honestly, my wife asked me that question about 1,000 times a week. Why did I do that? I did that because there was 50 million people suffering with Alzheimer's disease in the world at that time. And I knew the problem was going to continue to get worse and worse and worse. Today we probably have 6 or 7 million people in the United States that have Alzheimer's disease. There's probably another 20 million people that have early onset dementia. And then there's probably another 20 million that are on their way to those processes. So the projections are 50 million people, 15 million in the United States, 50 to 70 million people worldwide that will have this problem. And I believe, just based on my work in the scientific and pharmaceutical community, there's not going to be some magic cure that everyone keeps talking about. We want the cure, we walk for the cure, we're after the cure. There's no cure. I know what's in the pipeline. I know what they've studied. I've seen the results. Nothing that's currently underway is going to solve the problem. Now, I'm going to probably take a lot of criticism from the scientific and or pharmaceutical community for those statements, but I'm just giving you the facts the way I see them. And you can accept them or not accept them. I'm perfectly okay with that. I'm used to being criticized for unique ideas, and it doesn't bother me one bit. But my view is that there's not going to be anything on the horizon that's going to help. Now, how does this relate to Anna's question? I think the issue that she's interested in understanding and for you to understanding is I went all in on this project and it had nothing to do with money or my own personal glory. It had nothing to do with any of that. I was committed to the project because unfortunately that's the way I'm wired. Now, sometimes I wish I wasn't wired that way, but I am that way. Um, my goal in life is to contribute things that make a difference in people's lives. And in this particular case, I was so deep into the process, so committed to the understanding what I believed to be the right answer, that I was unfortunately willing to give everything I had, and it affected me financially. Now, since then, in the last 10 years, I've dug out of the hole. I've been able to get myself into a better position. I've bounced around into a couple different things, which is, I want to get to that too.
Mm-hmm.
And essentially, what's occurred is I've been involved almost after that whole experience occurred. I went into what I'd call denial, self denial. I went into a depressive state where I couldn't believe that it had failed. I couldn't believe that big pharma and other scientific people weren't jumping on the bandwagon with this very promising science that showed everybody that it was, in fact, able to help the disease. We did a study back in 2005 where we looked at 100 women, double blinded, placebo controlled study that was basically sanctioned by the FDA, looking at ways in which we cut out if we could cut out luteinizing hormone in Alzheimer's disease patients, would it make an effect? And guess what? It stopped the disease completely over a period of 9 to 12 months. It literally stopped the progression of the disease for 9 to 12 months. That research, that scientific approach was never picked up by Big Pharma or even the NIH or anyone else. We never got a nickel of funding to pursue that process. And the only reason I can come up with as to why that didn't happen was because our approach was repurposing a drug that had already existed. And you couldn't patent it, and you couldn't find ways in which you could make multi-million-dollar profits from it. And therefore, nobody was interested in the drug. But the point of this was that didn't stop me. I kept fighting. I kept looking for investors. I kept looking for ways to keep the idea alive. And at some point, there was no money left. There was no support for what we were trying to do. So I had to go back to living my life and finding a way to take care of my family. So I bounced around from CEO job to CEO job, jobs that were not in my heart, but jobs that put food on the table, and were able to dig myself out of debt from the fiasco we had gotten into. And that's how I spent many, many years from probably the age of 55 to 64 or 3 or 4. That's when, in fact, I met Anna. And
Well, first, I just want to thank you for, opening a life about
yeah,
such a hard time in your life. And I just think it's, at least for me, I appreciate you so much because for someone to go that far to care about other people that you don't even know is just so special. And
Well, thanks. And you, as you well know, I'm never one. I'm not looking for a pat on the back. And again, I appreciate your support on that issue. Again, to me, it was like it was never a question of it had to be done. It had to be done because it's a problem that needs to be fixed. And nobody I see that's out there currently, it's not to say that scientists and pharma companies don't want to fix things. It's not that. But I do think, unfortunately, profit and money and that whole process of how research gets done and funded and all, I think sometimes it's convoluted. I think that sometimes people miss the writing on the walls because it's about money and profit. And unfortunately, that's the way life is. And so we go on from there.
yeah.
But I
So
think
on a happier note,
on a happier note, here's the point. The point is this. I concluded that maybe it's not a drug, maybe it's not a pharmaceutical is what we should be looking for. Maybe we need to think that. So in my own journey of looking for ways to keep myself healthy, and by the way, I was able to transform myself mentally, physically through exercise, functional and integrative nutrition. I improved my diet. I began to incorporate adaptogens, uh, microbiome,
yeah, your gut
my
health.
gut health. Anna would teach me how to, my gut was connected to my brain, my
Mm-hmm.
heart was connected to my brain, just the whole concept of functional and integrative nutrition. And so during those kind of relative years where I was actually experiencing my own journey, I began to reimagine ways in which we could accomplish the balancing of the hormonal systems and bring support to the inflammatory issues, to the oxidative stress issues, and
Uh,
bring support to the insulin issues that women face as they're going through menopause and beyond. And that's how our relationship started. And I'd have to say it was Anna that planted the seeds in my brain that helped me rethink an approach that might be effective. And I'm more convinced than ever, based on not only what I see and read and research, that food and nutrition can be medicine, but it's not a magic pill. It's not a pharmaceutical. It's not waking up in the morning with a headache and taking 3 Advil. I take three, maybe 2 Advil for most people. It's not just popping a pill in an hour later feeling better. Nutrition, integrative health, and functional living is really a lifestyle. But the point is, there are means, and we're now creating nutritional supplementations that will help you get there. Now, that's not the only part of what we're trying to do. We're not trying to just create a product that we can sell. We're actually trying to promote a lifestyle, an
and
approach.
also almost creating a community where we can bring in women and acknowledging how important it is to start feeding your bodies and nourishing your brain right now at perimenopause and menopause, and knowing that each person is unique. And first of all, we're gonna always recommend actual real food first before anything else. But yeah, this supplement that we're creating it with so much love for you, with so much science behind every single ingredient, so that when you have it every single day, you know your brain is getting some good nutrition that is going to help you function and preserve your brain for a long time.
But it needs to be part of your lifestyle. I mean, it needs to be daily. I mean, it's not something that you once a week. Oh, I'll take these pills or drink this shake and I'm going to be great. No,
Yeah.
it's becoming it's part of your life. And again, I want to just equate it to my own journey. Um, when I started on the process of working out all the time and eating correctly, I didn't transform in a matter of weeks or
Mm-hmm.
months. It took a good year. And when I say a year, that's not a very long time. I basically went from a body fat of about 20% to where I'm a current 10% body fat, 180 pounds. I'm in the best shape I've ever been. And as I said, I'm going to turn 70 next year. I couldn't be in better shape physically. I'm better shape now than I was when I was running track at John Carroll University when I was 20 years old. I might not be as fast, but I'm certainly in good shape. But
Definitely.
so again, I want to get back to the whole concept of what we're trying to accomplish here. The ingredients, and we'll go into this in another live stream because again, we don't want to bore you to death in one session. But the ingredients associated with what we're trying to do here have been researched. When I was triggered by Anna to start looking into ways in which nutrition might bring answers to the problems that I had been studying, I started to find population studies and population data from around the world that basically would identify certain types of diets and food would affect different ethnic groups around the country, around the world, whether it be in Iceland or whether it be in Sweden or whether it be in Brazil or whether it be in any other place around the world, you'd be able to determine um, what was in their diet. And then there's also a huge body of scientific data that looks at different types of nutrients like omega 3s, like resveratrol, like turmeric,
Vitamin D.
vitamin D, vitamin E, probiotics, inositol. All these different things have been studied. And I methodically, with Anna's support, looked through all these research papers, and I mean thousands and thousands and thousands of research papers that we reviewed to determine the potential effectiveness of different ingredients. The next step was to understand how do these ingredients fit together in a way that your body can metabolically support them. Now, keep in mind, as you well know, most of you probably take supplements. You're probably used to seeing the kinds of things that get advertised on the internet all day long, social media all day long. And typically, they're what we call biohacking. They're basically giving you massive doses of certain things that biohack you into some kind of a stimulated state. Now, as I look across the brain space, or what they call the nootropic space, there's probably 50 different products on the market that address stimulating your brain, getting your brain to think clearer, those types of things. That's doing nothing to support your long term brain health. That's what I call a glorified double espresso from
Just
Starbucks.
stimulant
It's a stimulant.
at the moment.
And
Mm-hmm.
again, I'm not saying that's a bad thing. There are times I like to get a stimulant. There's also times when I like to get a depressant, like a glass of wine or a beer. So I'm not against any of those things. What I'm saying is to maintain long-term cognitive health, bone health, skin health, and all the other things associated with menopause and beyond, you need a daily nutritional approach to accomplish that long term. And it's what you do to your body in your 40s and 50s and early 60s that's going to make the difference as to whether you have dementia, cognitive decline in your 70s and 80s. That's my point. Now, I also want to just editorialize that this is not excluding men. I actually am very fond of men. If you haven't noticed, I'm actually a man myself. And I have a lot of empathy for men. Remember, my initial observation with the physicians that I dealt with were based on men. It was based on an observation that this drug that the men were taking was actually helping with their cognitive decline. But the issue is this: men have different issues relative to women. Women go through menopause abruptly, as I mentioned. Men have issues that are a little slower. Typically, men go through dementia process about 10 or 15 years later than women. In women, the dementia starts earlier. And again, I believe it's related to menopause. Here's another fun fact for those of you that would like to know. If you've had a hysterectomy and you've had your ovaries removed and your uterus removed, that starts the time clock on the luteinizing hormone estrogen problem that I talked about. Now, supplemental estrogen therapy can, in fact, help. And I actually recommend it. And I also recommend it. And I'm not a doctor, so I can't recommend things prescription wise. But I know a lot about the topic. I've been involved in healthcare services, in science and pharmaceuticals for almost 45 years now. So what I would suggest is, um, if you've had a hysterectomy, that increases your rate of cognitive decline by about 30%. Women that have had a hysterectomy have a 30% higher incidence of menopause or a cognitive decline. It's been showed, and you can look up the studies by the Mayo Clinic, that women that have had hysterectomies have a higher rate of cognitive decline.
Mm-hmm.
So those are some of the issues that, again, I'd like to just get on the table. And we are literally looking forward to having much more in-depth discussions about the
Yes.
nutrients and the value of the things we want to put in our formula that we
Yes.
have put in our formula, which by the way is in the process of being manufactured and we hope to introduce in the next 4 to 6 weeks. And I would encourage people, if you're interested in the story and if you have any questions, and trust me when I say this is our passion and our purpose. Feel free to reach out to us through Messenger, any other means. Our emails are, I believe, on our Facebook page,
Yes.
and we're happy to respond and answer questions to the best of our ability.
Yeah, and definitely please like our Facebook page and follow us on Facebook. But we are super excited to be here for you at your service and to help protect as many brains as we can early. So
Do we have any questions coming in for us?
I don't think we do,
We don't.
but
I mean, I guess you guys understood everything I said, so I guess it's
but we'll be back in another live soon where we can go deeper into the ingredients we're putting in our formula. All right. Thank you for being here. We appreciate your time.
takes everybody.
Bye bye.